Hi there, this is David and welcome to the Top 10 Hardest JRPGs Ever Made, Part 2. If you missed the first part, a link to it can be found in the video description. Although I do love them, JRPGs seem to have a reputation for being a bit on the easy side, but not these games. I did a Part 1 a few years back where I went over some difficult games, but after reflection and some fan input, I thought of 10 more, so let's get started. Number 10, Vey, released for the Sega CD. I know many of you already know this, but I was a Nintendo kid growing up. It wasn't that I didn't want a Sega, I did. It was just that my parents wouldn't buy one because, Nintendo and Sega are the exact same thing. So it wasn't until many years later that I played Vey through emulation, and I guess it's not so much hard as it is incredibly tedious. The amount of grinding required between each and every dungeon to put up with the ridiculous difficulty spikes is insane. We're talking hours of wandering back and forth on the world map just to enter the next dungeon or even to make the trek to the next town. It's a shame too because I really enjoyed the game as well as the story, but the sheer time investment to go anywhere turned me off. And once I got to a certain death, I just put it down and never picked it back up again. Number 9, Lagoon, released for the SNES. Back in the day when I could really only get games on special occasions like birthdays and Christmas, I would keep a running list all throughout the year of the games that I saw on Nintendo Power and write them down. Then, when it came time to create that Christmas list, I would rank the games in order from what I wanted the most to the least. Lagoon looked interesting, but it was always on the bottom of that list, and it wasn't until I got a job that I picked it up for myself used for $10. And boy am I glad that I didn't waste a Christmas gift on this pile of trash. Your hero was armed with like a toothpick and sent out on his lonesome to destroy gobs of enemies in horribly long dungeons. No matter what you're fighting, it becomes a matter of life and death because you can barely hit anything. It's ridiculous. Compared to other action RPGs of the time, it just falls so short. Number 8, Phantasy Star 2, released for the Sega Genesis. Oh, good God. I spoke about this game before in my 16-bit Worst Dungeons video, and there I said that pretty much every single dungeon in the entire game could qualify as a worst dungeon, and I'm still sticking to my guns on that one. But it's not just the dungeons that make this game hard, it's your party members and character recruitment as well, because if you're not careful, you're liable to drag along some bottom-of-the-barrel gutter trash characters with you because, believe me, not all characters are created equal here. And if you don't know to go back to your home periodically, you're probably not going to collect all your characters either. I am aware that the game came with an instruction manual filled with maps for all of the dungeons, but when I finally got around to playing this, it was pretty much just all me, a pen and paper, and game FAQs to navigate. Number 7, Kodelka, released for the PlayStation. This is a horror RPG, probably the first horror RPG released in the West, and the precursor to the much more popular Shadow Hearts series. But while Shadow Hearts plays much more traditionally, Kodelka is more like an action-adventure game where you solve puzzles, utilize tools, fight battles, and explore the creepy monastery. Not knowing what to do to proceed is an ever-present concern, but the battles are such a pain in the ass too. They take place on a grid, and your 3 party members face off against dismembered corpses, ghouls, and poltergeists, only you're always at a disadvantage because your weapons continuously break all the time, ensuring that you never get too powerful and you're always just struggling to survive and you constantly feel at a disadvantage. Number 6, Final Fantasy IV, released for the DS. Believe me, I have played some shitty remakes in my time, but this one really takes the cake. When I picked it up, I thought that they just transitioned the game to 3D, added some extra story elements, and fleshed out the characters. That would have been enough for me. But no. God forbid they leave a classic alone. In the original, you really didn't have to grind at all. The pacing was perfect. But in this bastardized remake, not so much. It's just become a horrible, tedious grind. Not only are the bosses completely overpowered, but every single trash mob that you encounter is armed with really annoying attacks like instant death, stone, and their one-hit kills with their crazy attack power. It's pretty much a requirement to have Rosacast slow at the beginning of every single battle if you have any hope of surviving this ridiculously difficult journey. Number 5. Brainlord, released for the SNES. You guys know how the 7th Saga is like the hardest game ever? Well, this is the 7th Saga in action RPG form, complete with puzzles so devious, I remember 12-year-old me crying in frustration. Yeah, there's only 5 dungeons to complete, but they're super long with multiple paths to follow, doors to unlock, and of course there's also plenty of backtracking. And while the puzzles can be infuriating, what really got me as a kid was the platforming, especially jumping onto moving platforms from disappearing platforms, then sliding all over the place on ice while the enemies slaughter me. And let's not forget the pitch black dungeons where you can barely see your nose in front of your face. I remember being so excited to get this because it was an Enix game, only to be massively disappointed. Number 4. Mother, released for the NES. While this series is one of my absolute favorites of all time, the first game here is rough around the edges to say the least. I do remember reading about it in Nintendo Power, but then nothing became of it. However, I was first in line to play the game when the beta ROM was finally leaked. I was expecting an NES Earthbound, but man, there are some balancing issues here. Grinding is the name of the game, and you're alone for an inordinate amount of time and then sent to places really far away from save points and inns. And then whenever you finally do get some partners, it's not much of a reprieve because the dungeons just balloon up in size. Just look at some of these maps. Combine that with a crazy encounter rate, hard mobs, and getting lost all the time, and you have the recipe for one of the hardest NES games ever made. Number 3. Alundra, released for the PlayStation. I know that this game has a cult following, however, I truly believe that they're in an actual cult, because how anybody could play this game more than once is beyond me. I bought this at full price on the day of its release, and at first I loved it. But then as I got a few hours into it, I encountered the devious, hellacious puzzles that it's so well known for. And we're not talking about puzzles like in Lufia 2 where you can just kind of look up the answer to figure it out. I'm talking about puzzles like in Threads of Fate and Brainlord, where if you don't have lightning-fast reflexes and the patience of Job, you might as well just quit. I know that I did quit when I got to this one dungeon where I had to keep torches lit, but there's like drops dripping from the ceiling putting out the fire. It was so frustrating about threw the game across the room. Number 2. Brandish, released for the SNES. I want to make something very clear here. Normally whenever I feature a game in these lists, I edit and I cut many pieces together in order to give you guys a feel of what the game is all about. I'm not going to do that here though, because do you see how the game is kind of like jumping around? That's normal. That's the way the game actually is. It's just so completely disorientating that it makes it unplayable to me. Like, what were they thinking? I remember reading with this abomination in Nintendo Power, and it looked really fun. It looked like Soul Blazer. So I rented it from Video Wonderland, and I played it for maybe 10 minutes before I was like, what the hell? I kept resetting it, thinking that something was wrong with it, but no. That's the game. To say that I was pissed is an understatement. How anybody could play this clusterfuck mess is just beyond me. And finally, number 1, Oshagami, Ruining Blue Earth, released for the PlayStation. There are some games that anybody can pick up and enjoy. They offer intuitive gameplay, a graceful learning curve, and the ability to progress steadily through the game. However, Oshagami is not that game. At first glance, you may think that it's just a Final Fantasy Tactics clone, but while you're able to power up pretty quickly and experiment around in that game, here, if you don't know what you're doing in the very first battle, get ready to die a horrible death over and over again. Permadeath rears its ugly head here as well, and if somebody dies, your only replacement is a new level 1 grunt that you have to grind up to snuff, all while the enemy's levels are equal to your highest leveled guy. Normally in any other tactics game, you move and then you attack and that's it, but not here. You can only do as much as you have rap for, which for the most part means you doing nothing while the enemies just attack you over and over again. It's infuriating. Well, that's it for the top 10 hardest JRPGs ever created, part 2. Please be sure to watch part 1 if you missed it, and if you like this video and what I do here on the channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Links to both can be found in the video description. This has been David. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.